Okay, welcome to our first day of the Exodus Bible study. Just remember, whatever you take from your table, make sure either take it home or put it in your mailbox someplace you'll remember. For those on Google Meet, everybody able to download it okay? I can't see anybody's faces, so they'll have to chime in if you can't download it. But it's up there. Got it up there yesterday, so let's go ahead and begin with prayer, and we'll dive into the book of Exodus. Dear Lord, we thank you for allowing us to gather here this Labor Day weekend, especially as we think about the point of this holiday. May we appreciate more not just the physical rest that you give us, but more importantly, the spiritual rest from our labors, to know it's all accomplished in you. Give us that rest through the study of your word today, we pray. Amen. Okay, so Exodus Bible study. You start getting into it. First page gives you a little bit of a timeline, the history leading into Exodus. So Exodus does, thankfully, and we'll get into chapter 1 today, it does pretty much pick up where Genesis left off. So Genesis, of course, creation of the world, everything there, and then very quickly, mankind's fall into sin, disrupts that perfect world, makes everything imperfect, and then we get moving on from there. So it ends getting into Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob. So at the very end of Genesis, you have Joseph, son of Jacob, making sure to get his family down to Egypt to take care of them, feed them, provide for them. And that's how we have Abraham's descendants down in Egypt to start. So to give you kind of a timeline, 1876 BC, that's when they moved down to Egypt. Not too long after that, Jacob dies. 70 years after that, Joseph dies. And then this one will come up a little bit later. Anybody ever heard of Hammurabi? I have one person. Anyone else? Okay, so it'll come up real briefly, but Hammurabi, and that's why I have it here dated, he develops a written legal code in Mesopotamia, and there are going to be parallels with the Ten Commandments. We'll bring it up just a little bit when we get there. That's Exodus 20. So you got a while before we get there. But that gives you there. So this next part is important to understand of where we are in Egypt. So 1730 BC, approximate date when the Hyksos, the foreign rulers of foreign lands, take over the lower Egypt and establish the 15th dynasty, a dynasty of foreign pharaohs. So you have a different set of pharaohs coming in, which is going to link us into the Exodus account, because we're going to hear about a pharaoh that didn't remember Joseph. Well, you actually had a whole regime change in there, so that actually would happen. But the Egyptians, they're getting proficient in geometry, especially with making the pyramid, using war chariots. That'll come up in Exodus. And then 1580 to 1570, roughly, range of dates for the expulsion of the Hyksos from Egypt by Amos, the Theban ruler from the 18th dynasty. This begins the New Kingdom period of Egyptian history. So that's what is happening there. 1530, roughly, Aaron is born. 1526, Moses is born, and that's when we get the same time Pharaoh's order to kill the Hebrew sons. And then I just thought that was interesting, so you have it in there. 1500, Egyptians develop effective pharmaceutical compounds. So they're making drugs. I mean, good drugs that help us. And then 1486, Moses flees to Midian. 1446, that's really where the majority of the book of Exodus takes place. And it ends in 1445. So interestingly, if you don't notice it, Moses has a really nice broken up life. It really goes in 40-year chunks, and he's got 3 of them. So the first 40 years he's in Egypt. Then the second set of 40 years, he's not in Egypt, he's in Midian. And then the last 40 years is the Exodus period, and wandering before they get to the promised land. So Are we sure about those dates? So I debated on doing one thing. How many of you guys have seen the old Charlton Heston 10 Commandments movie? Of course. Is there anybody who hasn't? Maybe I should ask that. Okay, we got two who haven't. Good, because it messes up my idea of what actually happens in the Exodus. The 10 Commandments movie is a good movie. It's a long movie, but it is a dramatization of the life of Moses. But there's things in there that you're like, well, didn't that happen? And you're like, no, that was in the movie. So I thought about paralleling it in, but pretty much a majority of the 10 Commandments takes place while Moses is in Egypt. And I think that's where you get into a lot more of the inaccuracies, because we're going to look at a few other Bible passages that give a better picture of what Moses' life in Egypt was like at the start. But one of the things that comes out of the 10 Commandments that I'm going to want you to push out of your head, probably not Pharaoh Ramses. Like that's kind of one that was conjectured out there, that the Exodus would happen during Ramses II, his rule. Probably not. So that's what page 3 is about. Are we sure about these dates? So this is the thing, we're going to go with the Bible to date it. So according to 1 Kings 6, the Exodus took place 480 years before the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel. So now we can date that, because we know when Solomon's 4th year was, 966 BC. So then it's traditionally held that the Exodus occurred in 1446 BC. The 300 years of Judges, 1126, fits comfortably within this time span. In addition, although Egyptian chronology relating to the 18th dynasty remains somewhat uncertain, recent research tends to support the traditional view that 2 of this dynasty's pharaohs, Thutmose III and his son Amenhotep II, were pharaohs of the oppression and the Exodus, respectively. So there's probably your grouping. By the way, Thutmose, we're going to actually talk about his name a little bit too. It's a traditional Egyptian name as well as it is a Hebrew name. On the other hand, the appearance of the name Ramses in Exodus 1:11 has led many to the conclusion that the 19th dynasty pharaoh Seti I and his son Ramses II were the pharaohs of the oppression and the Exodus, respectively. Furthermore, archaeological evidence of the destruction of numerous Canaanite cities in the 13th century BC has been interpreted as proof that Joshua's troops invaded the Promised Land in that century. These and similar lines of argument lead to a date of the Exodus to 1290 BC. The identity of the city's attackers, however, cannot be positively ascertained. The raids may have been initiated by later Israelite armies. Since we won't get into that, but there is actually a phrase in the book of Exodus that tells us about that. The conquest of the Promised Land was never going to be a quick thing. The Lord even says, I'm not going to drive them out all at once, because then actually the land will be filled with wild animals and you're not going to be able to handle it. So it's going to drive them out slowly. So yeah, it wouldn't be this mass of all these areas conquered. They also could have been done by the Philistines or other outsiders. In addition, the archaeological evidence itself has become increasingly ambiguous. The recent evaluations have tended to redate some of it to the 18th dynasty. Also, the name Ramses in Exodus 1:11 could very well be the result of an editorial updating by someone who lived centuries after Moses, a procedure that probably accounts for the appearance of the same word in Genesis 47:11. We're going to talk a little bit about that, because you have to remember, as we're going to get into in a second, Moses is the author. So Moses is generally going to write how people of his day understand. So there are some place names that come in that wouldn't have existed in that time, such as in Genesis, they talk about a place in Canaan called Dan, which it wouldn't have been called Dan until after the conquest. But if you're writing to a whole bunch of Israelites later, they're going to understand it. It's think of it this way. Do you call it Istanbul or Constantinople? You call it Istanbul now, but it used to be called Constantinople. So if we said, Istanbul, but talked about it in a period when it was called Constantinople, we would just use Istanbul so that everybody knew what we were talking about in our current day. So that does happen. So that's where that evidence doesn't point so well as to the earlier dating, but the later dating of 1446. So that's the traditional date. That's what we're going to go with for it. So page 4. Maybe I've told you it before, maybe I haven't. The names for the books of our Bible, the ones we currently use, come out of the Greek translation called the Septuagint, where they kind of themed the name of the book of the Bible. Hebrew kind of just is simpler. They take the first word and that's the book. So, for example, Exodus, the first word is Bereshit, in the beginning. So Genesis, if you're saying it to a Hebrew speaker, it's just called Bereshit, in the beginning. Interestingly, Exodus, then, they take the first two words, Va'ela Shemot. These names, that's really the title of the book, these names. But Exodus, that comes from the Greek. It means a journey out of. So that's more, we know that's what the theme of Exodus is. It's a journey out of slavery, a journey into the promised land. And that ends up being a good theme for the entire book, and where I want you kind of to have that thought coming back to it. So our name for Exodus comes back to about the year 285 BC. And we already kind of went through the recap of Genesis, but in that second paragraph, really important to note, so the perfect world became completely imperfect, but the Lord, though, promised that the offspring of the woman would destroy Satan and repair our relationship with God. That one-sided covenant or promise was passed down from God to Adam, to Noah, to Abram, to Isaac, to Jacob. Genesis ends with Joseph saying to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, then you must carry my bones up from this place. So very much Genesis just sets it right up to go right into Exodus. Like, this was the promise and what they're looking forward to. Also, the phrase the Ele Shemot also occurs in Genesis 46:8, a very identical listing, what we're going to see right away in Exodus chapter 1. So very much telling you those first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they have a uniformity to them. They're written in succession, all written by Moses. So yeah, you're not meant to really divorce these from each other, but just kind of keep going. All right. So the author identifies it's Moses, that he is the author of the first 5 books of the Bible. That has been contested in the last 3 centuries. So only in the last 300 years have people really started to be like, well, maybe not Moses. And they come up with this whole system, JEDP, that there were 4 different authors and they were all just kind of like patched together like a quilt. So there's the J for the Yahweh, the personal Old Testament name for God, the E for Elohim, the generic name for God, D for Deuteronomic, and then P for priestly. So Deuteronomic more teaching, priest more the worship stuff. We're going to see how it really is a uniform book. It's really not this patchwork idea. But that third paragraph there on page 5, of all the books of the Pentateuch, it is Exodus that presents the story of Moses' birth and of his activities as God's chosen leader of his people. The contents of the book, moreover, show the author to be a person thoroughly acquainted with Egyptian customs, names, and gods, as well as with that country's climatic and geographical conditions. The description of the Israelites' departure out of Egypt and also the details of their travels in the desert to Sinai is that of an eyewitness. When we therefore read in the book itself what the Lord directed Moses to write on a scroll, so the various events would be recorded, and that Moses wrote down everything the Lord had said, we're confident that the author of Exodus could be no one but Moses himself. So, since the Exodus happens 1446-ish BC, and then they go on for the next 40 years, that's the time period in which Moses would have written this book. So then page 6, just that's your outline. Exodus is kind of basically in these three chunks, chapters 1 to 18, the deliverance out of Egypt. Chapters 19-24, a covenant is established with Israel at Sinai. And then 25 to 40, the tabernacle is constructed. All right, so anything about the intro before we actually dive into Exodus 1? Okay, I try not to get us too bogged down on that, but it's really good information to have. So, yeah, we're going to read, in general, bigger chunks of Exodus than, say, like Amos or Ephesians, where we read smaller portions. So we're going to go ahead and we'll read Exodus chapter 1. All right, these are the names. So there you go. The title of the book, Ve'ele Shemot. These are the names of the sons of Israel who went up to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. The descendants of Jacob numbered 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. So just quick side note, the sons are not listed in chronological grouping. They're listed according to their mothers. So it goes Leah, Rachel, then I think Zilpah and Bilhah. So Leah and Rachel were the official wives of Jacob. Bilhah and Zilpah were the maidens, kind of that's not the right word, attendants to his wives. And that's a whole mess in Genesis of basically they become 2 more additional wives for Jacob. So verse 6. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were fruitful and multiplied greatly and became exceedingly numerous, so that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with hard labor, in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their hard labor, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? And the midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people, every boy that is born must be thrown into the Nile, but let every girl live. Okay, so the events of the first chapter of Exodus, they span about 400 years. So that takes us from the end of Genesis, getting us up to Moses' birth. So I was thinking of world history. I think this is just good for perspective. What's happened in the last 400 years? What are some major events that you can just think of in the last 400 years?
How about a second attempt to eliminate the Jewish nation?
Yeah.
More literally.
This country was established.
Yeah, we didn't have this country.
American Revolution.
Was just being, settled by Europeans 400 years ago. That was just happening.
Mechanical industry, electronic industry.
Yeah, think about
these cars.
Nuclear technology.
yeah, think about car you drove to get here today. That happened in the last 400 years. The technology we're using to study this together, that happened in the last couple of decades.
Rise and fall.
Goes along with
Soviet Socialist Republic.
Electricity.
Yeah, harnessing of electricity. But yeah, just like, whoa, like when you step back and actually say, okay, 1600, a whole lot has changed in our lives and our world. I mean, Chuck mentioned, even in the last 100 years, 2 world wars. Now, war is nothing new, but those were on a scale we had never seen before.
That was a lot of war.
Yeah, a lot of war, a lot of people.
With war comes also the advancement of medicine too.
Yes, yeah. Advancement of medicine, hospitals.
Your mom brings up a good one, printing press. She'd also said
Yeah.
the industrial age, but the printing press.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
technically the printing press was slightly earlier. It was more like 500 years because it was before the 15. It was in 1400s. I believe was Gutenberg's printing press. It
But
was
one-
before Luther. I know
One,
that.
one could argue general literacy.
Well, yeah,
as a
because you
result
get
of
it
that.
mass produced, but that is an interesting thing because could look back on that because people did know how to read and write, but to what extent? That's one thing I have seen in history. That's why you could put the Bible in German and people would read it into people's homes. But yeah, so that's the whole point. Is like a lot can happen in 400 years. So especially when you get into this, like you see 70 people, and we get the number much later, where the number of men over 20 years old is 600,000 plus. So the general estimate for the nation of Israel at the time of the Exodus is generally 2 million. So yeah, when they're saying they became numerous, yeah, in 400 years, you went from, family of 70 to 2 million. But yeah, even our world population has gone from 1 billion to 7 billion in 200 years, not even 400 years. But yeah, that's all what's happening. Oh yeah, landing on the moon. How about that?
Yeah.
Wrote that down of just like, hey, we started exploring space. Just how much can happen in 400 years.
Julia writes classes and contacts too, which is huge.
Yeah,
having
yeah.
The ability of
Think about that.
Yeah, very good. So next question, just recall what Joseph had done for the Egyptians. You guys remember what Joseph had done for
he's
the
the first
Egyptians?
prepper,
He's the first prepper.
real prepper, I guess.
Yeah, so go with it, Chuck.
Oh,
Tell us about the prepper.
well, you remember Pharaoh had his bad dreams and he couldn't get anyone to figure it out, and so God had revealed to Joseph about the 7 years of famine. Well, the 7 years of plenty followed by the 7 years of famine. And that's how Joseph got in the position where he was, where Pharaoh said, "You're in charge." And so he harvested 20% into stores for those 7 years. And then during the famine, they fed a nation out of those stores. Not only a nation, but they fed others out of their stores, and probably would have otherwise have been starved off the face of the earth otherwise. So
Yeah, so you really the nation of Egypt owes, in a way, their survival to Joseph. So that's what he had done. So that's why, right away from here with the history, I wanted to bring that up of like, it is important to note what happened. There was a takeover during the time Joseph was down there. And then that regime was removed too. So yeah, it would kind of make sense. You've got 2 regime changes during this 400 years. And this has just left it so that they don't remember. This is not a part of their history. So they don't feel like they owe anything to Joseph. They're the conquerors. They're the rulers. They're in charge. We don't care who this guy was, some dead guy from long ago. So now that kind of like, okay, that's why the situation changed so drastically. Then got the note there on page 7, again, about the name, city named Ramses, talking about the dating. So Bible's chronology would have said Exodus 1 occurred at least 150 years prior to Ramses' second reign. But the city's name means literally born of the god, so Re. Re was one of the most popular gods in the history of Egypt, worshipped since at least the 4th dynasty, so around 772 BC. It's entirely possible that a city honoring this popular god was built hundreds of years before Ramses II. So, yeah, that's just, there you get those moments where it's like, does it refer to that Ramses or something else? But even without being sure of the identity of this new king of Egypt, we know he had a big impact on the Israelites. How did he affect the Israelites?
Changed their social class in a big way.
Yeah. Took them from independent people to what?
Slaves.
Yeah. You're all ruled now. You're the labor force. What else? What else changed for the Israelites under the new Pharaoh?
Try to be killed by, hard labor, just.
Yeah, driving them purposefully hard to slow down their growth as a nation. Yeah, just trying to wear them down. And then, of course, take it to the next step. What's the next step for the Pharaoh with the Israelites?
Population control.
Yeah.
Serious population control.
Tries killing them off with the children. Yeah.
Which is funny because they're using them for a workforce and men are stronger than women. So it's funny that they chose to eliminate the males and not the females.
Yeah. So although we cannot agree with this new Pharaoh, how do his actions make sense for him and his rule? Not justifying him, but just how does it at least make sense?
Workforce preservation.
He's worried they're gonna rise up and take over his country.
Yeah, it's kind of this idea of like, if I can just make them subservient and just like, this is their status quo, we can just control them. And that way they can serve us and they won't, kick me out because, he took over. He knows, a regime shift can happen. There can be a coup. So yeah, the Pharaoh is, it would kind of make sense to do this, to use them just as an asset. All right, next page of the study guide. So I did have a little bit more fun. I did put a little bit more of my own personal humor into here. So here you go. Here's the Tarkin effect. In light of what we've read so far in Exodus chapter 1, react to George Santayana's, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but his quote, and there's going to be part of it, a more simple version of paraphrase we use, but this is the actual quote. Progress, far from consisting in change, depends on retentiveness. When change is absolute, there remains no being to improve and no direction is set for possible improvement. When experience is not retained, as among savages, infancy is perpetual. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So how do you see using Santayana's quote? Just react to that, especially in light of what we just read in Exodus chapter 1. I'll put it out this way. The paraphrase you're probably much more familiar with is, those who do not remember history are doomed to repeat it. That's basically what the quote is. And that's where we get the quote. We paraphrase his statement here. But how do you kind of see that working with the events in Exodus 1?
I don't know, isn't this Pharaoh forgetting what they did to save his country?
Well, there is that. There is definitely that. But even within the context of the first chapter, this Pharaoh should have learned a lesson twice, and the whole rest of the book is going to be him learning the lesson the third time. So what other two lessons should have been right in front of his face that he didn't learn from?
Don't mess with God's people.
Well, yeah, because I'm going to oppress them and make them subservient. And what happens?
God gets involved and
They get even more, they flourish. You oppress them and they're flourishing. You're trying to keep them down, but the exact opposite is happening. Okay, I'm going to start killing their kids. And what happens? Yeah, the Egyptian midwives are just like, oh, no, they're so vigorous. They just have these kids. Yep. So the very thing he's trying to prevent, he's actually hurrying through what he's doing. And that's going to be, of course, the whole story of the Exodus. So the more you tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. That's the Tarkin effect. So same thing. The Pharaoh's trying to tighten his grip. This is how he can control these people. And he's going to really set the stage for their Exodus. All right, but we get I think it's a very interesting account here with the Hebrew midwives. So considering that story, considering what happened there, are we supposed to take away a lesson that God blesses lying? What do you think about these Hebrew midwives?
Well, they did what was right, not necessarily what was being mandated by the law.
Yeah, and we know that. We have
we have that guidance.
Yeah, you put those two instances together. You go to Hebrews 13, 1-7, where it says, every earthly authority that exists has been established by God. So whatever you owe them, you do it in honor of God. So if respect, honor, taxes, etc. But then you get Acts 5:26, when the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, is commanding, you cannot preach this name of Jesus Christ. And what do the apostles respond?
That's what comes first.
Yeah, we must obey God rather than men. So here with the Egyptian midwives, what are they doing? Yeah, we're not going to obey something that blatantly contradicts God's law of life.
Some fifth commandment thing,
Yeah, this whole well, they don't have that yet, technically.
Oh yeah, well, but they do, because it's in their hearts.
That's the thing. Yeah, they know, because there definitely is, and even in Genesis, it's written on their hearts, but also just in Genesis, especially in the flood, God makes it known that if you take a life, your life will be owed. That there is this very precious nature to human life. But what other details do you get into the Hebrew midwives? So you get to hear they fear God. So they're believers and they're acting out their faith. Did they necessarily lie to Pharaoh?
Well, if it was a nation of 2 million and there are only 2 midwives mentioned, I would say they're not getting around to everybody.
Yeah. And what other detail did we have about the Hebrews, the Israelites?
Tough.
Doing all right.
They're booming. They are. Is it that far-fetched to actually say the women are vigorous and give birth before we have a chance to get there? Maybe it was the truth, the absolute truth. Maybe it was part of the midwives just saying, you know what? Those ladies are fine. We don't need to be there right now. Oh, they had the kid without us. you know? But yeah, I mean, clearly they're doing what is right. And even in the end, if they were lying, if they were just letting the kids live in direct defiance to Pharaoh's commands, we know that's the right thing to do. It doesn't exempt them from lying. It's still a sin to lie, but that is absolutely the right thing to do in that situation. I think that's something sometimes we forget. Not every situation in life do you just have a simple here's right, here's wrong. Sometimes it's just like, well, you got two good choices, pick either one, or you got two bad choices, pick the lesser of two evils. There's a reason we have that phrase, is because sometimes that's all the choices we have left. So yeah, definitely less evil to lie and preserve the lives of these children than to go through with it. It is neat, though, to see that they are blessed. And I think that's also a good thing, is remember, guess what? All sinners are blessed by the Lord, because they're blessed in spite of their sin. And the midwives are no different. They did do a good thing in preserving the lives of these Israelite baby boys. But why does God bless anyone? It's because he chooses to do so, not because, oh, they lied, so therefore I'm blessing them. It was God's choice to do that. And in the end, we have Christ that takes away their sin of lying. And we have the New Testament promise, God does work all things for his good. So even through this, he works the midwives, their lives, into something good, gives them families of their own. Okay, so the word Hebrew is coming up now. Where does that come from? Abram, the father of the Hebrew people, is the first biblical character to be called a Hebrew in Genesis 14. Usually an ethnic term in the Bible, it was normally used by non-Israelites in a disparaging sense. Outside the Bible, people known as the Hebrew, a word probably related to Hebrew, are referred to as a propertyless, dependent, immigrant, foreign social class, rather than as a specific ethnic group. Negative descriptions of them are given in the Amarna letters, clay tablets found in Egypt. So that's kind of where that term Hebrew comes from. So Israelite makes sense, comes from Israel, Jacob's other name. So that's where the word Hebrew comes from. So we'll start to see that more. All right, good on chapter 1. Do chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2. Now a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. Okay, so I think this is one of those more familiar accounts. Bible story we often share, Moses getting his name. But as you hear this, I mean, did anything new stand out to you? Or maybe something you forgot, or something clarified, something you hadn't known before. So what do you what would you get out of this? Something new, something forgotten, something clarified?
Well, 2 things. One, I think it's weird that the Pharaoh's daughter is bathing in the Nile. Here nor there, whatever. I also think it's a little bit funny that later on Moses' sister is in confrontation with him. So what a few years difference it makes.
Yeah, which we don't. That confrontation does not come up in the book of Exodus. I believe it's in the book of Numbers.
Right.
But yeah, that does. So I thought you were about to say one of the things I'm sorry. I got clarified. No, Chuck did not read my mind. How dare you get an F?
That's okay.
No,
She's the clairvoyant one, not me.
You're the hard teacher.
I'm a hard teacher. Yeah. No, just what else? Things, because there are a couple things I picked up, but I just want to hear what you picked up. Just kind of something new, something clarified, something remembered.
So maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I also did realize that I had seen that movie. So in the movie, like she put Moses into the basket, and then he bobs along with the alligators that are, and in here it just seems like, unless I'm misreading it, she put him in the basket and then she just put him in the reeds, and it wasn't like he was bobbing down the river. It was just he happened to be seen, and that was where he was hidden.
Yeah, partially with that. I don't know how far, and that might have been because I was confused. There's also an animated one, The Prince of Egypt.
That's probably
what you're referring to. But regardless of it, I think in my head, so this one was one of mine. In my head, I had this picture of Moses' mom just putting Moses in this basket, floating him down the river like, oh, whatever, whatever. But you see, it's very purposeful with the sister watching what happens to the basket. So like, this baby is never unattended.
And they probably know the Pharaoh's daughter.
This is probably a habit. Yeah, he probably knows Pharaoh's daughter. So that there is, you don't have that explicit, but there's that idea kind of there of, was this kind of planned? Do we kind of know where the royalty is, and might they take pity on this boy? So yeah, there's definitely that idea in there. So yeah, I guess I always
forgotten that he was from the house of Levi.
Yeah, so he's a Levite, which makes sense when you remember then his brother Aaron, high priest. So all the Levites, yeah, it's one of those things forgotten, but now we remember. Good. What else? There was a lot of things in here that were clarified for me. So one we kind of touched on, but yeah, it was said once in a children's book, and Wendy asked me explicitly, do we know that it was Miriam who was watching Moses? And unless you can show me that Moses has another sister, yes. I mean, it has to be. At first I was like, I don't know. She's not named. She's not named, but there's never another sister of Moses mentioned. So it's most likely this is actually Miriam. And she's going to come up, a few more times throughout the book of Exodus. She's actually listed as a prophet, which is pretty cool. So Miriam watching, but yeah, probably like Gavin pointed out, not necessarily rolling all down the Nile, but just placed in the reeds. So yeah, any other things that were just kind of like, oh, okay, that's clarified, or that was something I forgot, or that was something new. I don't remember reading this before. Gavin, are you about to say something? Or are you still thinking?
I was about to say something, but I'm not sure that I can articulate it very well.
Okay.
If it wasn't something that was planned, like if it was just he was being hidden there, it seems like one of those times that when the daughter went to go and get Moses' mom, if she wasn't aware of it, then she might have been like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got two comments. They're both the same from Faith and from Julia. Moses' mom got paid to take care of her own kid.
That was one of mine.
Yeah.
That I never thought about that before. Moses' mom got paid to take care of her own kid. I mean, it not only is Moses spared from this the genocide of the Israelite baby boys, Moses' mom gets paid to do it. Which, and there's just subtle thing to that. This is where I blame the Ten Commandments movie again. Moses is raised by his mother, not by the Pharaoh's daughter. He's at least weaned. And I mean, that's probably at that, probably 3 or 4 years old by the time she delivers Moses over to the Pharaoh's daughter. She got to raise her son. That's pretty awesome. That's something I've always kind of forgotten, that she gets paid to do it and she actually does get to raise him. That's going to play into something else. We'll see if we get to it this week. But yeah. Anything else? Something new, something forgotten, something clarified? So this is my last one. Pharaoh's daughter knows this is a Hebrew Israelite baby. She knows her father's decree. She pays to raise the child. And Pharaoh accepts Moses into his home.
Yeah, Faith writes that same thing, that the Pharaoh's daughter willingly took a Hebrew baby despite her dad's orders.
Yeah, and Pharaoh ends up accepting Moses as well. So that's kind of crazy when you think about it. And this is something that got mentioned, or I don't remember if I had a note on it. I didn't. Random thing that a commentary pointed out to me. So far in Exodus, women have been the ones opposing and thwarting Pharaoh. That's just kind of cool. Like all these instances, women are actually thwarting Pharaoh.
Right down to his own daughter.
Yeah, right down to his own household, his own daughter. Yeah. I just thought that was neat. I never kind of put that together in my head. But yeah. So yeah, women serving God's purpose all throughout Exodus 1 and then first part of chapter 2. Okay, any other ones before we move on? Okay. So on the name Moses' name, bottom of page 9, Moses' name had significance for both Egyptian and Hebrew hearers. In an Egyptian name like Thutmose, Moses is related to an Egyptian verb meaning bear, produce, bring forth, and a noun meaning child, while Thut was a god. So Thutmose and similar names celebrate a connection between the birth of a child and an Egyptian god. Pharaoh's daughter named Moses in a way that suited Egyptian naming patterns and commemorated her action in saving his life, celebrating his connection with her. The name calls to mind a Hebrew verb meaning draw out, which to Hebrew readers must have sounded appropriate for a person who led the Israelites out of Egypt. The child's name seems more appropriate than Pharaoh or his daughter could have anticipated. So yeah, pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, let's try to finish chapter 2 and we'll end there for today. So verse 11 through 25, Exodus chapter 2. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." And where is he? He asked his daughters. Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat. Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, I have become an alien in a foreign land. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. Okay. So just in there, I would definitely thing clarified or forgotten. Verse 11.
Once again, it wasn't like the movie.
Yeah.
He fled before.
Yeah. This is the whole thing of like, and also where his own people were. The fact that he calls them his own people, what does that tell you about what Moses knew about his heritage? He knew he was an Israelite. He didn't, and that's where I think the Ten Commandments movie again screws you up, because it portrays it as if he's just adopted into Pharaoh's family. He's an Egyptian, and he has to come to this revelation that I'm actually an Israelite. Whereas, yeah, if you're raised by your mother, and he is aware who his people are, yeah, he probably was well aware. I'm an Israelite. So I want to add 2 New Testament passages that give us insight into Moses during this time. So this is on page 10 in the study guides. The first one, Hebrews 11, and just kind of note, what new information or insight do you get into Moses' life? So Hebrews 11, 23 to 27, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child. They were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. So what insight or new information do you get from this Hebrews passage about Moses in this time?
Did he work as a slave?
See, there's obviously, it wasn't he, again, I blame the Ten Commandments movie.
Yeah.
He was not just living this posh life in the palace. I mean, granted, that's what we're going to see in the next passage. There was definitely an education difference, but it says he purposely allowed himself to be mistreated. He forsook the idea of being just Pharaoh's daughter. Son of Pharaoh's daughter. There we go. I said that wrong. But yeah, he did not take on this life of luxury and royalty. He chose to be mistreated with his fellow Israelites. So yeah, it's not just this. That's again where the movie dramatizes it. And I mean, honestly, that's a more dramatic movie, but that's not really what the Bible says about Moses. So yeah, anything else from the Hebrews 11? Any other little insights?
Well, he had faith in God. He didn't worship the Egyptians' gods.
Yes, and this, now I'm going to come back to this, but if you guys watched, there was a more modern Exodus movie, came out a couple of years ago with Christian Bale, Exodus, Gods and Kings. That one portrays Moses more like an atheist / agnostic. Now, there is one event that will come up where I'm going to bring that question up, but at least at this point, it's by faith that you learn that, yeah, Moses is operating out of faith, not out of fear. Chuck, what we got on that?
Well, faith said that he didn't leave Egypt fearing the king's anger, but by faith.
Yeah, isn't that because like how it's presented in Exodus, you would just think like he's just running for his life, but actually there's a little bit of like, well, maybe he thought he would stay stand trial, whatever. He's like, this kind of leads us to a bigger idea. I forget if it comes out better in the Exodus, but basically, just like Moses' parents saw him and saw he was no ordinary child, there's something different about him. How much they knew, we don't know. But at least Moses had an idea that I was set apart for something. Did he understand already that he is going to lead God's people out, that he is going to be judge, as the one person asked? Don't fully know that, but at least the ideas are there that maybe Moses did see himself as a potential deliverer of his people.
Well, he would have been aware that all of his male peers were deceased. I mean, that was an edict.
Yeah.
And he alone was allowed to live. So he would have had some sort of a clue that he was different.
Yeah.
If no other reason, Pharaoh's daughter had pulled him out of the river.
Yeah. So let's just read also Acts 7, 20-25. So in context, this is Stephen, one of the 7 who were appointed to help the 12 apostles. And he's being confronted, and this is part of his speech to the Jews. At that time, Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months, he was cared for by his family. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and in action. Please remember that next week.
Yeah, because he didn't need.
Right?
No, Aaron,
Right.
Aaron, I need Aaron.
Yeah. When Moses was 40 years old, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by an Egyptian, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they did not. So that's where you get that insight from Stephen of like, yeah, Moses actually thought he was being a deliverer. But God says, nope, not right now. 40 years will go by before he calls him again. Okay. So I'm going to make just one more note, and I think that we're going to have to stop there. And so we'll come back and kind of bridge chapter 2 back into chapter 3. But priest of Midian, Ruel, also another name for him is Jethro. We'll know him by those 2 names. Midianites were descendants of Abraham through his wife Keturah. That was his wife after Sarah had died. Because of this connection, perhaps Jethro led others in worship of the God of Abraham and Isaac, as did Melchizedek. The Midianites as a whole seem to have been a nomadic desert dwellers who were later enemies of Israel. We'll come up to this priest idea again, but there's no formal priesthood established, but people understood we need priests. So this is a thing that comes up. So probably there might be some, what's the word
They're
for?
probably closer to like preachers, aren't they?
We'll talk about it more because I have a section later. We're going to talk about it specifically, but people understood you needed leaders for worship, and that there were sacrifices given. There might have been some. I don't know if this is the actual word for it, but I'm going to say polytheism, multiple gods. Maybe you didn't worship just exclusively the God of Abraham and Isaac. That there is an idea, but we don't know for certain. But it is somebody that Moses does worship with later. So this does seem more that he's a priest of the true God. Then the map on page 11. You might not find Midian right away.
It's kind on the right.
So top left, that's Egypt. You see Goshen, that's where the Israelites are living. And it's just got a bunch of multiple paths in here, but you have to go all the way bottom right. That's how far Moses fled. That's where Midian is. So going all that way to get away from Pharaoh. So that's where he is. And then we'll come back to that last part of chapter 2 next week, and then move on into, I guess it's all very familiar territory right now. But some very important things to come. So any questions thus far?
I have a question.
Gavin.
because it said in the New Testament reading that he fled not for fear of Pharaoh, but for fame. I paraphrase very heavily, but in verse 14 it says, "Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known." What was he afraid of then?
Yeah, right. So.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a better answer. Because yeah, I think there's definitely cause for, hey, we're afraid of, because Pharaoh does have the power to execute him. Is he afraid of losing position, standing? Is he afraid of the people revolting against him? So yeah, there's other things he could have been afraid of other than the execution of his life. And I think that's what the author of the Hebrews is pointing out, is like, here, Moses isn't so much afraid to die as he is maybe of what else might happen because of this. Would he be jailed? And then therefore he can't help anyone. Stupid fly.
I know, right?
So there's just other explanations of, like, we immediately impose fear of death, where it just says afraid. So he's afraid. A lot of things to be afraid of when you know you've broken the law and you've done something that people are not going to be okay with. And even the people you're trying to help are not okay with it. It's like, that's a big thing to weigh on your conscience.
Interestingly enough, he was the author of the book. He says he committed murder. Interestingly enough, he doesn't say that he had this altruistic reason for leaving. He said he was scared. So, for what it's worth, I think that
It's a good insight check.
But being afraid and going somewhere in faith is two different things.
That's what I'm saying. Is he could have said, he could have said that he left for that reason, and he just outright says he's scared. So,
But they are both the inspired word of God, so they both have to be true.
And they both
Sure.
can be true. That's the thing. It's just, what was he scared of? That's the thing. We don't have the object.
Maybe the idea is he's thought he was doing God's work 40 years before God really intended him to do it. And he realized, hey, this isn't where it was going. Maybe
Yeah.
I need to back out.
Yeah. If you kill someone, expecting to be thanked, and instead they're like, what are you going to do? You're going to kill one of us? Just like you killed that Egyptian? It's like, So he thought he hid it. It wasn't hidden. So he's found out. He's got guilt. What will happen to him? I think, honestly, just maybe that's enough. But there's still the idea where you put those two together of, he can be afraid and yet also have faith. I guess maybe that's the bigger takeaway. You can be afraid and have faith. So that's what I got for you.
Okay.
All right, let's.
God's timing is different than ours. So.
Yeah, I went way over. We got to get ready for worship. So let's end with prayer. Lord, we thank you again for this time in your word, and to know that you work all things for your good. And so even if we are afraid, let that fear dissipate as we trust in you to take care of us and to lead us out of this world to you. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. We got to go, but thank you, everybody. Sorry, I didn't realize, I'm like, oh, I'll just wrap that up. Nope.